Sagir mentioned Professor Paddy Hilliard's seminal work, Suspect Communities, and his reference of that actually leads us very nicely to our next speaker. Jane Basham is going to be speaking about Stop and Search, Profiling Communities. Now, Jane was the chief executive of the Ipswich and Suffolk Council for Racial Equality and led nationally and internationally recognized work with the police and other criminal justice agencies on Stop and Search. At ISCRE, Jane questioned local agencies on their proposed implementation of the government's Prevent strategy that affected people from Muslim communities. Jane is currently on the board of the Runnymede Trust and is a member of Stopwatch, and I'd like to invite her up, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak. And I think stories are really important. Forgive me, I've got a few pieces of paper to read through. I wanted to perhaps talk a little bit about my experiences of working with people through my work with the Ipswich and Suffolk Council for Racial Equality, but also talk about the work of Stopwatch. So to talk a little bit about the general stop and search that's happening, and then moving into Schedule 7 and the current review. We led a community-led reference group that held the police to account on a monthly basis, and we challenged forms which had descriptions that they said were reasonable suspicion. So descriptions like baggy urban clothing, these are grounds for stopping somebody. Clearly anti-police, these were grounds for stopping and searching somebody. Acting suspiciously, scruffy appearance, and Eastern European. So as we move towards wanting to see reasonable suspicion embedded in Schedule 7, we need to think very carefully about how reasonable suspicion is interpreted by police and agencies. Obviously, we had Nick Robinson last week. He demonstrated to me in his apology in which he said that he quoted a senior Whitehall source that the police had used that description was that institutional acceptance of terms like of Muslim appearance. And I know some people were really positive about his apology, but for me, it demonstrated the power of the rhetoric that's going on and the anti-Muslim sentiment that we're seeing. In terms of stop and searches, and you'll hear it as well with Schedule 7, everybody's saying that the use of it's going down. The general use of stop and search has dropped a little bit, about 7% over the last year, but we are at an all-time high. There's over 1,200,000 stop and searches generally taking place over the UK, and that's opposed to less than 200,000 back in 1986. So don't believe some of the hypes that this is a power that is not being used as much. We are really at an all-time high in terms of the use of stop and search by agencies. I think the other thing I wanted to talk to you, we did a piece of research and we asked members of the public, which include members of local Muslim communities of all different ethnic backgrounds, and we asked police officers what did they think was the impact of stop and search. And officers generally thought that on the whole, around about 50 to 70% didn't think that it had much of an impact. But obviously the story when we spoke to members of the public was around about 60% felt that it really had an impact. And I think this is the other issue that we have to address is the understanding of the impact. I think stories are a really important way to address that understanding, but I've seen police officers sit and really feel very impartial to people that are in tears as they tell their stories. So I think stats, figures, research, policy, and use of the law is actually as important as getting those stories across. I think we need a combination of those measures. I did have a PowerPoint presentation, and I had a picture of this man. He's a white man, and he is the only terrorist that we've ever had arrested in Suffolk. And he was caught at Lowestoft train station, far-right extremist with bombs and various horrible bits of equipment on him. There wasn't a spike in stop and search in Suffolk when he was arrested of white British guys that looked like him. 2 years earlier, we'd had a young black lad had been shot and murdered at a nightclub in Iskry back in 2006. And that sparked a significant rise in stop and search. We saw a fantastic, an incredible peak in the use of stop and search against the black community. And in 2008, Suffolk was one of the highest, had one of the highest stop and search arrest rates. So for me, again, that's, it demonstrates the different approaches. And when we talked about the prevent strategy, I sat at some pretty boring local authority tables where they were talking about the implementation of the prevent strategy and who they would give their money to. I was insistent that we should be engaging with people from Muslim communities, and they kept telling me that I shouldn't be doing that because that was reinforcing stereotypes. But all of the activities, all of the projects, all of the work in schools were really looking at, how do we ensure that we engage with the Muslim community and we get them to integrate. Yet those voices were not at the table putting their side of the story. So it was an absolutely flawed model. In terms of Schedule 7, over the last, it's been really difficult to get the data, and Stopwatch has been really campaigning. It did an FOI to get the data in terms of ethnicity. We know that it's going down marginally, but we know that most people who are stopped are white, but we know that the most intrusive, the detentions for up to 9 hours, the taking of DNA is overwhelmingly black and minority ethnic people, and particularly Muslim. And despite the decrease in the use, the marginal decrease in the use of Schedule 7, there's been an increase. So actually the number of white people that have been exposed to the more intrusive powers has actually gone down. So the disproportionality is increasing. So we need to be not just looking at has it gone down, we need to look at the disproportionate effect. I just want to talk to you a little bit about Stopwatch. They obtained the first comprehensive statistics via an FOI. And some of the things that it's doing, it's ensuring now that the Home Office have agreed that they will regularly publish Schedule 7 data. We've had parliamentary questions asked on our behalf, and we've had David Anderson QC called twice for a full and public review, which we're still wanting. David Lammy, Lord Nazir Ahmed, and various others have joined our calls for, sorry, I thought someone was calling me, for an independent review. And the government have announced a review in September 12 of Schedule 7. So progress is being made. Stopwatch is an independent organisation, and it's a mix of academics, of researchers, there's a legal group, and obviously community activists, and there's an emerging youth group. And we know that a massive amount of young people are impacted by stop and search generally. The review, I think the proposals for the review are out of Schedule 7, and they're talking about reducing the detention time down from 9 to 6 hours. I'll just give you some headlines because I don't want to take too much more time. They can require reasonable suspicion for taking a strip search and have to have authorisation from a supervising officer, but I'm not very excited about this term reasonable suspicion. And they're going to repeal the power to take intimate DNA samples, but they're still going to retain the right to have non-intimate biometric data, so mouth swab and fingerprints. What Stopwatch wants and what we need to be lobbying for in partnership, because we can't do this on our own, we need to engage and work together, is that we want a minimum threshold of suspicion based on objective facts and intelligence. We want to amend the legislation and police codes of practice to ensure that biodata is taken from people who have been arrested rather than examined or detained. We want the Police and Criminal Evidence Act codes extended so that they support, they cover Schedule 7. We want standardised treatment. There's an incredible difference in treatment depending on which port you are or which airport you are. And we support the decision of the Independent Police and Complaints Commission to handle all complaints. There is, we've had some experiences with the IPCC, and they send the complaint back to the force that was actually responsible for the stop. It's not good practice, it's not independent, but we recognise that there's a challenge at the moment. The IPCC's reputation, I think, is in tatters. And we want to make sure that all people examined or detained are allowed to access a lawyer when they request it. So these are the rally and call from Stopwatch, and I'm sure you'll agree, or you might have some different thoughts about what you'd like to see in there. We have to work together. I think this is a fantastic launch of a fantastic website, but we need to work together. Yes, we need more complaints, but we need to think about how do we get those complaints. I know people have no trust, no faith, they don't believe they're going to be listened to, and they feel that they're going to be targeted if they have the courage to make a complaint. We can talk about litigation, it's great, but we're seeing a significant reduction in the legal aid provisions, and some of the most vulnerable are now unable to access justice because of the horrendous cuts that we've seen through the Legal Aid Punishment and Sentencing of Offenders Act. We don't really know, we haven't got much data on the outcome, so we know out of tens of thousands of people that went through Schedule 7 last year, there were only 10 convictions, and that's probably about 3 or 4 people. So I think it's about making, it needs to be an intelligence of understanding what those statistics mean in terms of the arrests and the outcomes. We need to calculate the disproportionality and get it right and understand it. And we need to recognise that this extends beyond a Muslim community issue and work in partnership. And I'll just close by telling you one of my first cases when I took up ISCRI was a woman who was 8 months pregnant, and she didn't want to go through the scanning machine. She was worried about radiation, and she was subject to a strip search. And she was told, because we think you might have a bomb in your belly and not a baby. She was a Spanish Catholic, and we took the case on and we referred it to the EHRC. We'll never know the outcome because they settled. And I think for me, there's 2 issues: was the trauma, the absolute trauma of about 3.5 years of trying to pursue a complaint to the end. And a sense of failure. I mean, I've met with her and she can't tell me. She won't tell me the outcome, what the settlement was or why. But I think there's a bit of for me it's about politically, is there a will to really address this issue? Or are we going to continue to allow institutions to hide behind this? It's too sensitive, it's based on really critical intelligence, and we can't tell you, so we have to settle. And I think that's a real challenge. So yes, we can encourage people to come forward, we can be horrified by their stories, but we have got to work with politicians to change the law and to change the culture at a political level in order for these issues to be to really impact on policy, and to see Schedule 7 delivered in a very different way moving forward. Thank you for listening. Thank you.